Up in the top lane, there's a running gag in reference to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which in biblical mythology are meant to symbolize death, famine, war, and conquest or pestilence depending on the interpretation. Essentially, they were the living personifications of, well, the apocalypse, meaning if you saw them heading your way, you were basically screwed. As a joke, League's top lane community saw it fit to create its own version of the four horsemen, four champions that no matter what the meta, no matter what changes or adjustments take place among the Rift, these four will always be popular, always be strong, and always be extremely annoying to go up against. Fiora, Riven, Irelia, and Camille. Each of them carry a lot of notoriety for their extreme carry potential, and while they don't see the same amount of use in lower divisions like Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, and Platinum, up in Diamond, Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger, you're guaranteed to find at least one of them almost every game. The four horsemen meme was mainly there to illustrate how if you want to reach high elo, you have to use one of them if you're a top laner. Obviously that's not factually correct, but you can't deny how influential they've been throughout top lane's history, and it seems like no matter what, Riot is always keeping an eye on them and looking for an opportunity to buff them, as evident by what they did to Riven a few months ago. So for today, let's talk about the four horsemen, or horsewomen, of top lane. The four horsewomen of top lane have all had a storied and equally tumultuous history over the years, having fluctuating performances along with peaks and valleys at different points in time. Miraculously though, there's never been a single instance where all four of them were pushed into obscurity, meaning there's consistently at least one or more realistically two of them that you have to watch out for, hence their analogy to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But what distinguishes them from other top laners? What makes them so special, both in practical performance and the community's almost unanimous resentment towards them? It has to do with the combination of character-specific attributes and surrounding circumstances. We'll start by elaborating on the latter element. Top lane is mistakenly considered the most straightforward role in comparison to the other four, and in some ways that can be true given the insular nature of the lane. More often than not, it's intended for the top laners to duke it out on their own in a 1v1 setting. But the reason there's so much diversity in champion classes is due to the central win condition of the role: pressure. Pressure is endemic to all 5 roles to a degree. However, it matters most in top lane since more often than not, that's their only way of influencing the map as a result of being isolated most of the time. Top lane is given so little attention on average that seldom is it the reason a team wins a game, but it can very easily be the reason a team can't win a game. In spite of top laners incessantly griping about how helpless the role feels at times, it's also the role capable of exerting the highest amount of pressure on the map. Think about it like this: let's say you're in a match and you have K'Sante vs Tryndamere, relatively tough matchup for the former given Tryndamere's extreme sustained damage and stick potential, both of which K'Sante struggles against. In this hypothetical scenario, Tryndamere gets off 3 solo kills and a 2-level advantage. Realistically, that doesn't seem too insurmountable from a macro perspective, and most likely that ends up being the case, especially if the rest of K'Sante's team is holding the line. This is why top lane feels frustratingly hard to solo carry in, because it's the hardest role to carry from behind. But what if the rest of Tryndamere's team goes even or better? That's when the true nature of top lane shines through. For the rest of the game, K'Sante will be unable to match Trynd 1v1, forcing his team to expend more resources and manpower than they can afford just to stop him from doing what he wants to do, a decision Tryndamere's team can exploit by gaining more control of the map. In this scenario, Tryndamere may not be the most fed member on his team, nor even be the MVP, but he makes it excruciatingly burdensome for the enemy team to try and make any attempt at pushing for an advantage. That's what makes top lane deceptively threatening. Its members aren't meant to win the game for their team, but to make it as close to impossible for the enemy team to win the game. That's their win condition, and this applies to virtually every class of champions, not just skirmishers. If an Ornn, Malphite, or Sion gets fed, it takes an excessive amount of effort to break through them, lessening their pressure against their teammates. You might be wondering how this is more pronounced for top laners when such a concept applies to every role that falls behind or gets ahead. That ties back to the isolated nature of top lane. Even after laning phase concludes and everyone can go everywhere, top laners are naturally off doing their own thing most of the time, only ever joining the rest of the team when there's a potential fight breaking out, hence why 90% of them take teleport. For the other 4 roles, there's no implicit rule saying they must contend with their respective lane opponent for the remainder of the game's duration. If Blitzcrank's going against the Morgana, he can roam and get stuck on elsewhere. Junglers don't necessarily have to fight each other and often spend more time trying to avoid each other unless one is sufficiently more fed than the other. Bot laners are seldom if ever facing off against each other 1v1. Mid lane comes close, but unless your name is TF or Yuna, they're probably not off doing their own thing. When trying to respond to an enemy top laner, who is the most logical person to send? Your own top laner. There's that subtle unspoken rule that top laners have to fight each other in perpetuity for better or worse. Now, how is this relevant to the 4 horsemen of top lane? Because, hands down, with no caveat, no asterisk, they're the best at pursuing this type of win condition and exerting maximum pressure against the enemy team. Though top lane is known for having an impressive roster of 1v9 champs like Jax, Gwen, Aelia and such, the 4 Horsewomen stand out for their incredible consistency. Like I said before, regardless of the meta, you're bound to find at least a couple of them in prime position. Peruse through all challenger top laners in any region, you'll see Fiora, Camille, Riven, and Irelia somewhere in their champion pools. Let's go through each one and highlight what distinguishes them from the rest of the competition. Beginning with Fiora, the most emblematic of the quartet, true to her moniker as a grand duelist, Fiora is one of the most challenging opponents to face head-on in single combat. She has incredible combo mobility and tempo thanks to the speed boost from striking vitals or being within range of her ultimate's target. At rank 5, Launch has a base cooldown of 3 seconds if it strikes an enemy, giving her an easy way to sidestep the majority of the game's non-point and click or immediate activation abilities. Riposte can completely shut down a lot of champions, not just those at crowd control. Fiora can parry Garen's ultimate if he doesn't silence her just before it. She can block Nasus's Wither if she predicts when he'll use it. She can block Alawi's Test of Spirit, all kinds of abilities. Moreover, even if the opponent doesn't rely on crowd control like Trinamir or Trundle, Riposte has a 50% cripple for 2 seconds, sufficient enough for her to establish a commanding lead in a 1v1 during that time. Complementing her dueling specialized kit is her all-purpose form of damage, percent max out true damage, the only source of damage in the game that can't be itemized against. Ordinarily, true damage can be mitigated quote-unquote through building health instead of armor, but with it being percent max out true damage, you could have 10 trillion HP for all the difference it makes. With these attributes, only a select few champions can physically take her in a 1v1 fight, like the other 3 Horsewomen of top lane funnily enough, because they also have the same arsenal of abilities in this department, albeit in different ways. Fiora's auto-attack nature also lets her strike down turrets ridiculously fast. As of 9.19, both her lunge and blade work can work on towers, giving her backdoor potential rivaling that of some of the game's best wrecking balls like Trundle and York. Furthermore, with her great mobility, she can get to where she needs to be measurably faster than most other top laners, so towards the mid to late game, even 10 seconds of free time for her can result in an exposed inhibitor, and with her exceptional dueling potential, you'll more likely than not have to send at least 2 members to stop her, and that plays right into her team's hands. Also, though she's not the best when it comes to 5v5 teamfights, she can still pose an immense threat to the enemy team if at any point the conflict scatters them, making them easy targets for her. The next Horsewoman will be Camille. Like Fiora, she's also a very mobile champion, perhaps not in terms of uptime, but definitely in distance coverage. Hookshot possesses arguably the farthest non-semi-global dash range of any ability, as it can travel a total of 1600 units. Then you have Hextech Ultimatum with an additional 475 that also renders her untargetable during the animation. Trying to chase after her or escape from her is no small task. Defensively, Camille's passive is hands down one of the best for trades. All that's required to activate it is to basic attack your opponent, immediately granting you a 20% max health shield for physical or magic damage, whichever one the opponent deals more of. This allows her to come out of most trades on top. Aside from that, Hextech Ultimatum has a lot of defensive utility despite not appearing like it does. Granting her half a second of untargetability entails it can be used to dodge virtually everything in the game. Malphite Ultimate, Urgot Ultimate, you name it. Not only that, but it also disrupts ongoing channels, so if you time it correctly, Camille can negate stuff like Katarina's Ultimate, Master Yi's Meditate, or Lucian's Calling. Of course, she can also do that with Hookshot's knockback. Also, like Fiora, Camille has true damage, a lot of it. Precision Protocol deals 1.8 times her auto attack's damage as true damage that also modifies any on-hit components to true damage as well, including stuff like Spellblade, enabling her to deal well over 1000 true damage in the late game. Given that it's flat true damage and not percent, you can stack health as a counter to it, but what it really denotes is how devastating it is against targets who don't have that much. Most squishy champs have only about 2 to 3k health at best, so 2 empowered Qs can basically nuke your entire health bar. Now by the time you see this, mythic items will have been removed, including Divine Sunder. Thank God. With Sunder, Camille actually did have percent max out true damage as the Spellblade was percent health. There was a running meme about how Camille players would reach full build once they completed Sunder, as that would push her true damage from maybe 1 to 200 to over 500 per Q. Overall, however, Camille's DPS is actually the lowest of the 4 since it's all concentrated into her Q, but this is compensated by her ability to guarantee that damage. Hextech Ultimatum can prevent a target from running away through any means, making her more scary to fight by herself unless you're absolutely certain you can take her 1v1. And not many can. Third Horsewoman is Riven, who is possibly the most different from the others as she's less focused on auto attacks and more on abilities, but that doesn't make her any less effective. Being the only manaless champion of the 4, she can theoretically stay in the game the longest, provided she has some way to sustain herself, and with her build most of the time she does. She has by far the best general mobility of the group, with Broken Wings and Valor granting her 4 short-ranged free target dashes. A noteworthy advantage Riven possesses over Fiora, Camille, and Irelia, apart from having no-cost abilities, is that she has area coverage. Her Q, W, and Ultimate all deal damage to multiple targets instead of being focused on only one, making her surprisingly deadly in teamfights. A well-timed flash third Q followed by a W stun then blast of her ultimate lets her wombo combo entire teams by herself. Defensively, Riven has potentially one of the best abilities in the game in this department. Valor is both a dash and a shield on a 6-second cooldown at the time of making the Sitio. She can sidestep abilities and or face tank half of her opponent's rotation, as the shield value is sufficient enough to fully block usually one ability. But over time, that can add up. Plus, she has an instant AoE stun with Ki Burst, disrupting enemy rotations and channels. These two in tandem allow her to safely damage her opponent while minimizing the consequences of retaliating fire. As for offense, though Riven has neither percent health nor true damage, she makes up for that with immense, and I emphasize immense, physical damage, far outstripping her counterparts, especially when you remember she can damage multiple enemies. Her passive grants 30 to 60% bonus damage on each auto attack after casting an ability. With 7 potential casts over a rotation, that's up to 420%. Then, with all 3 strikes of Broken Wings, that totals 210% of her AD by itself. Then with Ki Burst, it's another 100% bonus AD, and with Blade of the Exile, she gets 25% bonus AD, multiplying the aforementioned ratios by a quarter. And lest they forget, the Wind Slash itself having up to 180% bonus AD that also increases with the self buff. Granted, these numbers are subject to change, but empirically, they stay around the same ballpark. Point being, Riven's damage is no less extraordinary than that of her peers, in spite of not having either true damage or percent health, though she can struggle versus tanks because of it. Riven's definitely more of a skirmishing top laner than a straight up duelist, but she's still a threat in single combat. She can shred through almost anyone in the game. Lastly, Irelia, the newest addition to the 4 Horsewomen. Her visual gameplay update spared no expense in turning her from a burst-oriented diver to a sustained damage skirmisher. Irelia has the worst general mobility of the 4, but at the same time, far and away the best combo mobility of the 4, which is enhanced even further when fighting near minions. Blade Surge can be used up to 3 times on a single target if she lands Flawless Duet and Vanguard's Edge, granting her a point-and-click dash that heals and also applies on-hit effects. The on-hit component of Blade Surge is what enables her to go items like Blade of the Ruined King or Wit's End and get many procs of it quickly. Trying to escape from her is just an impossible task most of the time. Survivability-wise, Irelia can either be the most resilient or the least. Defiant Stance is an interesting ability, whose value can't be determined as easily as the others, but it can also potentially block a lot more damage than the others by virtue of its extended duration. Moreover, so long as she's attacking minions, she has an almost infinite amount of health to work with. Similarly to Camille, a meme was spun around Irelia reaching full build with a single item, only in her case it was Vamp Scepter, a 900 gold item. With just that, back when it gave 10% lifesteal, Irelia could full heal off a single minion wave in conjunction with Blade Surge, once having a ridiculous 20% AD healing ratio, essentially meaning her Q had 20% pre-mitigation lifesteal. Damage-wise, Irelia also doesn't have percent health or true damage, but she can build items that allow for it, like once again, Blade of the Ruined King. She is least burst-oriented as well, but the best at sustained damage. Ionian Fervor grants her a significant amount of attack speed and on-hit damage, so while she doesn't have true damage, she can be hard to itemize against, as she can deal hybrid damage. Of the 4, Irelia's 1v1 potential is definitely the weakest. Not that she sucks at it, she's still one of the hardest champs to duel, but she's more of a backline threat in teamfights on account of her insane gap closing potential. Even so, her spell pushing aptitude cannot be disregarded. She can easily run through minion waves and towers if given the chance. So based on my description of each horsewoman, you probably noticed they all have shared traits that not only make them proficient in achieving the overarching goals of top lane, but also make them quite meta-resilient, as they can take on opponents of all shapes and sizes rather competently. By no means am I implying they're infallible. All champs have weaknesses, and of course League is a team game, but what lends credence to their ubiquity is how dependable they are. Even if you shut them down early, if you don't close out the game fast enough, they can and will find a way back in. That's why they're analogous to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Alrighty, so that wraps up my little tirade on 4 of the most aggravating champions in top lane. By the way, some have posited the idea of replacing Aelia with Gwen or by having her as an honorary 5th member, but I feel like she hasn't been quite as omnipresent as those 4, mostly because she's been out for a couple years. But in any case, let me know your thoughts on the 4 champs in the comments down below, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion discussions if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next episode. Take care.